The September wind off Lake Ontario had teeth that year, and it came early. Terence Holt, catching myself. That name's already in the file. I need to write this clean. Let me start properly. The September wind off Lake Ontario had teeth that year, and it came early. By the third week of the month, the maple at the end of Birchwood Crescent had already gone half gold, dropping leaves onto the cracked asphalt of the driveway where Douglas Farr, 44 years old and a licensed millwright by trade, was lying flat on his back, underneath a 1987 Ford F-150 that didn't belong to him. It belonged to his neighbor, Gord, who was 71 and lived alone since his wife passed, and couldn't afford the quote the dealership gave him. Douglas hadn't asked to be paid. He'd just said, "Bring it over Saturday morning, and I'll take a look." That was how Douglas was. His daughter Britta, 9 years old and serious, in the way that children who've spent a lot of time around quiet adults become serious, sat on an overturned milk crate near the garage door. She had a library book open on her knees, but she wasn't reading it. She was watching the legs sticking out from under the truck. Her father's legs, in the same oil-stained Carhartt pants he wore every weekend, and she was eating a cheese string, pulling it apart in thin strips the way he'd taught her. "Is it bad?" she asked. "Not as bad as Gord thinks," Douglas said, from somewhere under the truck's belly. "Is it fixable?" "Everything's fixable." A pause, and the sound of a socket wrench turning. "Just depends on whether someone's willing to put in the time." Britta pulled another strip from her cheese string and thought about that. This was a Saturday in Douglas Farr's life. This was most Saturdays. The garage behind the house on Birchwood Crescent in Hamilton, Ontario, smelled like motor oil and WD-40, and the faint ghost of the wood stain he'd used to redo Britta's bookshelf in July. There was a space heater in the corner for the cold months, a transistor radio on the shelf above the pegboard, and a photograph of Britta at age 4 tucked into the corner of the mirror he used when he needed to see underneath things. He'd put it there years ago. He'd never moved it. Douglas Farr had been a millwright for 19 years, working maintenance at a steel plant in the east end of the city. He understood machinery the way some people understand music, not just the notes, but the space between them, the way a sound could tell you something was wrong before any gauge could. He could hear a bearing going in a conveyor system from 40 feet away. He could feel a misaligned coupling through the soles of his boots. He had not always lived in this house alone with his daughter. He didn't talk about that much. Britta had been 2 when her mother left, and Douglas had decided very early that his daughter would not grow up in a household full of bitterness. So he didn't talk about it. He cooked dinner on weeknights. He read to her before bed, until she got old enough to read to herself, and then they read to each other. He drove her to school, to swimming lessons on Thursdays, to her grandmother's house on the escarpment every other Sunday. He coached her soccer team for 2 seasons, before his shift schedule made it impossible. And even then he never missed a game. He was not the kind of man who talked about how hard it was. He was the kind of man who just did it. The woman's name was Claudine Beaumont-Ashworth, and she pulled into Birchwood Crescent on a Tuesday afternoon, in late September, driving a gunmetal gray Aston Martin DB707 that cost $437,000, which was a fact she mentioned within the first 90 seconds of getting out of the car. She was 49, the chief executive officer of a mid-sized logistics company, headquartered in Mississauga, and she had been driving back from a meeting in Burlington when something under the hood made a sound she described later as a sort of clunking lurch, and the vehicle's onboard system threw up 3 warning lights simultaneously, and the car lost power assist and rolled to a slow, undignified stop on Birchwood Crescent, directly in front of Douglas Farr's driveway. Douglas was home. He was always home by 4 on Tuesdays. Britta's swimming lesson ended at 5:15, and the pool was 12 minutes away. He heard the car before he saw it. He was in the garage, returning tools to the pegboard after finishing the F-150 the previous weekend, when the sound reached him. Not right, he thought, without even looking. Hybrid system. Something in the power delivery chain. He walked to the end of the driveway. Claudine Beaumont-Ashworth was standing beside the Aston Martin, with her phone pressed to her ear, looking at her car the way people look at things that have betrayed them. She was wearing a charcoal wool blazer over a silk shell, her dark hair pulled back precisely, and she was speaking to someone, her assistant. It turned out, in the clipped, unhurried tone of a person accustomed to having problems solved by other people. She glanced at Douglas. He was in his work clothes, not the plant clothes. Those stayed in the locker room, but the everyday ones. A faded navy Henley, the Carhartt pants, steel-toed boots that had seen a lot of years. She looked back at her car. Roadside assistant says 90 minutes, she said, to no one in particular, or perhaps to Douglas as the nearest available audience. What'd it do? He asked. She looked at him again. This time the look lasted a fraction of a second longer, and it said something he had seen before, the quick, quiet arithmetic that some people do when they're deciding how much of their attention a person deserves. It just stopped. Some sort of system failure. She gestured at the car with the hand holding the phone. The warning lights came on. Which ones? She blinked. I don't, all of them practically. There was a clunking sound first. Douglas walked toward the car, not rushing. Just the way he moved when he was thinking about something. Do you mind? He said. She took a small step back, not quite a step aside, more like a repositioning. It's a DBX 707, she said. The hybrid system is extremely sophisticated. It's not. She stopped. It needs a certified technician. I know what it is, Douglas said. He crouched beside the front wheel well, listening. He put one hand lightly on the hood. Have you had it serviced recently? He asked. Of course. Aston Martin of Toronto. 6 weeks ago. He nodded slowly. He walked around to the driver's side door, and she took another half step that was not quite out of his way. May I? He said, gesturing at the interior. There was a pause, the kind of pause that carries a question inside it. I appreciate the offer, Claudine said, and her voice had shifted into something carefully neutral. But I really think we should wait for the certified. I'm a millwright, Douglas said. He wasn't defensive about it, it was just information. 19 years. I work on industrial systems, but the hybrid integration on this model isn't as proprietary as the manual suggests. The power delivery architecture is similar to what I've worked with in plant automation. He paused. You don't have to let me touch it. I'm just saying I might be able to tell you what you're looking at. She studied him. He waited. Fine, she said. Take a look. He found the issue in 11 minutes. It was a thermal management fault in the high-voltage battery system. Not a failure, not yet, but a calibration drift that had started triggering protective shutdowns under load. The 6-week-old service hadn't caught it, because it hadn't been under the kind of sustained high-speed load she'd put on it during the highway stretch before Burlington. The system had been trying to tell her for a while. She just hadn't known what to listen for. He explained this standing beside the car, not looking at her, looking at the car. Can it be driven? She asked. Not safely. Not today. The tow truck will take it to the dealership. That's the right call, Douglas said. They'll reset the calibration. Might want to check the thermal sensor on the rear battery module while they're in there. That's where I'd look first. She was quiet for a moment. Then, how do you know all that? I read, he said. It wasn't a joke. He genuinely read manuals, service bulletins, technical forums, engineering journals. He had a shelf in the garage for it. Britta had once asked him why he read about cars and machines, when he read other books too, and he had told her that understanding how things worked was one of the best feelings in the world. Like solving a puzzle where the pieces were real and the stakes were real, and when you got it right, something that had been broken ran again. Claudine was looking at him differently now. Not warmly. It wasn't that, not yet, but with a recalibrated attention. The way someone looks when they've had to update a quick assessment. Well, she said. Thank you. That's helpful. I'll write down the sensor number for you, Douglas said, for when you talk to the service department. He went into the garage and came back with a notepad and a pen and wrote it down. The part designation, the location in the battery housing, the bulletin number from memory, and handed her the sheet. She took it. She looked at it. She looked at the garage behind him, the organized pegboard, the clean concrete floor, the F-150's empty space. The shelf of technical manuals visible through the door. This is she stopped. My garage, he said. Her eyes moved over it in a way he noticed. It wasn't an admiring look. It was the look of someone making room for a thing in their mind that didn't quite fit the category they'd already assigned it to. Britta appeared in the side door of the house. Dad, it's 4:20. I know, B. 2 minutes. Britta stepped out onto the step and looked at the silver car, and the woman in the wool blazer the way 9-year-olds look at things they find interesting, directly without apology. Is that car broken? Britta asked. It is, Douglas said. Did you fix it? No. But you figured out what's wrong with it. Yeah, he said. I figured out what's wrong. Britta nodded. This satisfied her. She went back inside. Claudine watched this exchange and said nothing. The tow truck arrived 14 minutes later, which was faster than 90 minutes, because roadside assistance had found an earlier opening. Douglas helped guide the car onto the flatbed. He didn't have to. The driver was perfectly competent, but he was already there, and it was the kind of thing he did. As the truck pulled away, Claudine Beaumont-Ashworth stood on the sidewalk and called her assistant to arrange a ride back to Mississauga. She did not say thank you again. She did not acknowledge Douglas at all as she waited, standing with her back half turned toward the garage. He went inside to get Britta's swim bag. He thought that was the end of it. It was not the end of it. 6 days later, on a Monday morning, Douglas arrived at the plant at 6:50 as always. He changed into his work gear in the locker room. He did his morning walkthrough of the primary production floor, checking the conveyors, the hydraulic presses, the overhead crane system that had been running rough for a week and was now due for its scheduled maintenance window. His supervisor, a compact man named Kenabara, who had worked beside Douglas for 11 years and trusted him about as fully as one person can trust another, met him at the crane bay. We've got a situation, Ken said. The situation was this. A logistics company called Beaumont-Ashworth Group had recently won a contract to service the plant's parts distribution. A mid-level contract, not enormous, but significant. And in the context of that relationship, the company's CEO had arranged a walkthrough tour of the facility that morning. The tour was standard, a business courtesy. The plant manager was hosting it. Douglas learned this at 6:58. Claudine Beaumont-Ashworth arrived at 7:15. Douglas was at the top of a scissor lift, checking a tension roller in the overhead conveyor, when the tour group came through the bay. He heard the plant manager's voice below, doing the explaining things to visitors narration. He heard other voices. He did not look down until he heard a voice he recognized say, clearly, "And what's happening up there?" He looked down. She saw him at approximately the same moment. The expression on her face, he caught it before she could replace it, before the professional composure sealed back over it, was not recognition exactly. It was something more complicated. A kind of realignment happening visibly behind her eyes. He came down the lift. The plant manager, Brian Solt, a broad, affable man who'd been running this floor for 8 years, said, "This is Douglas Farr, our senior millwright. 20 years on this floor. There isn't a piece of machinery here he hasn't had his hands on." Claudine extended her hand. "We've met," she said. Brian looked between them. "He helped me last week," she said, "on Birchwood Crescent. With the car." Brian looked at Douglas. "Neighbors Street," Douglas said. "Her car broke down. He diagnosed a thermal management fault in an Aston Martin hybrid system," Claudine said, "on the side of the road, without a diagnostic tool." Brian grinned. "Yeah, that sounds about right." Claudine looked at Douglas for a moment. Her expression was controlled, but it was doing something, carrying something that wasn't quite embarrassment, and wasn't quite apology, and wasn't quite admiration, but was in the territory of all three. "The service department confirmed everything you said," she told him. "The rear battery module sensor, the calibration drift, all of it. They actually called it a good catch." "Good," Douglas said. "They said most technicians would have missed it at a standard service." He didn't say anything to that. Not because he was being modest. Exactly. He just didn't know what to do with it as a sentence. It was the job. He'd seen what he'd seen. "I owe you an apology," Claudine said. The tour group had arranged itself into a small, attentive audience. Kanabara was nearby, pretending to check something on his clipboard. "You don't," Douglas said. "I do." Her voice was even. She had clearly decided to say this and she was going to say it. "I made an assumption when I saw your garage. I shouldn't have. The way I—" She paused. "I wasn't respectful. And you were nothing but helpful." Douglas looked at her for a moment. "I appreciate that," he said. "Truly, your daughter," Claudine said. "Britta, was it?" She searched for the word. "Very sure of herself," Douglas said. "She knew what you were doing, even when I didn't." He almost smiled at that. "She usually does." The tour continued. Douglas went back up the scissor lift. From up there he could see the whole floor. The conveyors, the presses, the crane systems he'd maintained and repaired and improved over 19 years. He could see Ken at his station, Brian walking the visitors toward the packaging line, Claudine Beaumont-Ashworth in her good blazer, moving through a room full of industrial machinery, without looking like she belonged there, but without looking uncomfortable either. Adapting. He respected that. He went back to the tension roller. The work was the same as it always was. Precise, physical, necessary. The kind of work that didn't care how it looked to anyone passing by. The kind of work that either got done right or got done wrong. And the machine knew the difference, and eventually everything that mattered knew the difference too. He picked Britta up from school at 3:30, same as always. She got in the truck and dropped her backpack on the floor, and immediately said, "Maddie Pereira's her dad is going to coach the soccer team because you can't anymore." "Maddie Pereira's dad would be good at that," Douglas said. "He's fine." Britta looked out the window. "He doesn't know the formations like you do. He'll figure it out." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Was the lady at the plant today?" He looked over at her. "How did you know about that?" "I didn't," Britta said. "You just told me." He shook his head, trying not to smile. "She was," he said. "She apologized." Britta thought about this. Outside, Hamilton moved past the windows, the residential streets, the old brick buildings, the escarpment rising in the distance, green going gold at the edges. "Did you forgive her?" "I told her I appreciated it. That's not the same thing." He glanced over. She was still looking out the window, but her face was doing that thing it did when she was working something through. "It's close enough," he said. "Grandma says you should say what you mean. Grandma's right. So do you forgive her?" He thought about it for a real moment, the way the question deserved. "Yeah," he said. "I do, because she apologized, because she didn't have to, she could moved on. Forgotten about it. It was easier to forget about it." He kept his eyes on the road. "Admitting you got someone wrong takes something. I don't think it's nothing." Britta considered that. "Do you think she's a good person?" she asked. "I think she made a bad choice and then chose to own it," he said. "I think most people are somewhere in between." "Between what?" "Between what they do at their worst, and what they do when they're trying." Britta pulled at the strap of her backpack. "Ms. Holloway said something like that," she said. "About character. She said character is what you do when nobody's watching. Ms. Holloway's not wrong. But in this case somebody was watching." "Yeah," Douglas said. "I guess in this case someone was." They drove the rest of the way home in the comfortable silence they had learned together over 9 years. The kind of quiet that doesn't need filling, that two people only reach when they have spent enough time in the same rooms to trust each other's presence, without requiring it to make noise. A month later, Douglas got a message through the plant's internal system. It was from the administrative contact for Beaumont-Ashworth Group, asking if Douglas would be willing to consult on a recurring basis regarding the maintenance scheduling for the logistics company's fleet vehicles, which included, among other things, 3 hybrid cargo vans and a pair of electric forklifts they'd recently brought into their Burlington distribution center. Was a fair rate. Better than fair. He read the message twice. Then he walked over to Kanabara's station. "You know about this?" he said. Ken shrugged with the particular shrug of a man who knows more than he is saying. "Did you?" "I didn't do anything," Ken said. "She called Brian directly. Brian talked to plant management. They thought it was fine." Douglas read the message a third time. It's good work, Ken said. You'd be good at it. I know that. Then what are you waiting for? Douglas looked at the message. He thought about the tension roller, and the thermal sensor number he'd written down from memory, and Gord's truck that he'd fixed for free, because Gord was 71 and lived alone. He thought about Britta on the milk crate pulling apart a cheese string, watching his legs sticking out from under the truck, with the calm, patient attention of someone who had decided that this particular sight, this person, this ordinary Saturday was worth watching. He wrote back and said yes, that winter was a good one. Not easy. Douglas Farr had not yet had an easy winter, and he had stopped expecting them, but full in the way that mattered. Britta's swim times improved. Gord's truck ran clean through to April. The Burlington forklifts, it turned out, had a charging sequencer issue that Douglas identified in his second visit and corrected in the third, saving Beaumont-Ashworth Group what their operations manager estimated at $40,000 in potential downtime costs over the following year. He didn't tell Britta that part. The numbers weren't the point. He told her about the forklifts, though. Told her about the charging sequencer, how it was a small thing that most people wouldn't notice, how it was the kind of fault that hid inside normal readings until the conditions were exactly wrong. How did you find it? She asked. I listened, he said. She thought about that for a while. They were in the garage. She was back on the milk crate. Douglas was reorganizing the pegboard, moving things he used often closer to hand, the way he did every few months when the layout stopped feeling right. Is that what you always do? Britta asked. Just listen? Mostly, he said. The machine usually tells you what's wrong. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. She looked at the garage, the tools on their hooks, the space heater ticking in the corner, the transistor radio between stations, the photograph of her at 4 tucked into the corner of the mirror. Did you know you could fix the lady's car? She asked. I thought I could. Were you scared to try? He put a wrench back on its hook, stood back and looked at the board. I wasn't trying to fix it, he said. I was trying to understand it. Fixing it came from that. He glanced at her. You can't fix something you haven't understood. People mix those up sometimes. Mix wanting to fix something and wanting to understand it. They feel similar, but they're not quite the same. Britta looked at him with the full serious attention she gave to things that seemed important. Which one's better? She asked. Understanding, he said. Always understanding first. The fixing is just what happens after. She nodded slowly, in the way she had that meant she was storing something away. Outside, the snow had started again. The fine, dry Hamilton snow that sifted down from a white sky and settled without sound on the driveway, the maple, the cracked asphalt, the truck in the driveway, and the quiet garage, and the small ordinary life that Douglas Farr had built here on Birchwood Crescent, one fixed thing at a time. He didn't think of himself as exceptional. He thought of himself as a man who showed up, who listened, who did the work whether or not anyone was watching. Britta knew, even then, that this was more than most.